Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Cloudy with a Chance of Insights, the bi-weekly podcast all around the Microsoft Cloud, from Azure to M365 to Dynamics and everything in between. As usual, we've got a range of topics to cover this week, and I think it's going to be a pretty interesting one. David is going to be taking us through 3 topics that have caught his eye recently, and I will say this, one of them has a connection to a 90s sci-fi film that I did not see coming, and it makes a surprisingly coherent point. You'll have to stay with us for that one, but beyond that, David is covering some of the tools that sit right at the intersection of where AI is moving from interesting to generally operational, and a piece of open source work from Microsoft that I think is going to matter more in about 12 months' time than it does today. Cyrus, as ever, will take us through the security section, which this week is a classic short and quick updates from Intune, Entra, Defender, Sentinel, and Purview. And if time allows, he's going to touch on a research paper that's just been published, which was paid for by Palo Alto Networks and led by IBM, on the state of cyber attacks versus defense. And I think there's some interesting findings in there, so hopefully we'll get to that one too. And finally, with myself, I'm going to sit somewhere in the middle of those two, as I usually do, with 3 things this week. Firstly, we've got Microsoft Q3 earnings on Tuesday next week. And what the Copilot adoption pictures looks like is going to be interesting, I think, around that release. Because it's going to be one of the more closely watched earnings reports this quarter, I think, because of what's going on. Secondly, a little bit of a shift. It's some prototyping work I've been doing this week that I think has changed the way I think about building demos, with a nice bit of serendipity with something that Anthropic released this week as well, or possibly even last week. Anyway, and finally, I'm going to do a little bit of Sentinel piece as well, which is around the Sentinel portal retirement. And we will touch briefly on that towards the end. Anyway, without further ado, I will pass it across to David to kick us off.
Thanks, Richard. And I want to start today with Meryl Fernando, who's been busily, I guess you could say, building quite consistently now, I guess, in the M365 and the Azure developer community for years. He's very well known. We talk about him a lot. And he's released 2 tools that, as you touched on, right, I think it's worth understanding properly, because I think we've touched on these in past pods, but I don't think we've actually gone into the detail of what they are. So I'm going to spend a little time on what they are and what they do. So the first one is Locker, Lokka, and at its core, Locker is a implementation of the Model Context Protocol, MCP, for the Microsoft Graph and Azure APIs. We've said this a lot, but for those that might be new, MCP is an open standard that allows OpenAI models to interact securely with external systems. And what Locker does is helps bridge that protocol directly to your M365 tenant and your Azure tenants. So I guess, what does that mean? In practical terms, this means you could use things like Claude, and maybe this is something you're going to touch on, right, Richard, on what you were talking about. Jachi, at GPT, or any of the others, right, the compatible AI assistants, and ask it to interact with your environment in plain English. So, for example, you could ask it to show you all the Intune device configuration policies assigned to a specific group, let's say, or find conditional access policies that have not excluded your emergency access account, or there's loads of things, right? Or tell you which Azure service cost the most last month. And it's really interesting because at this point, if you try doing that with LLMs today, obviously it'll fail, and it's got its memory as of whenever it is trained. So the LLM isn't guessing or searching the internet now. It's reading from your actual tenant through the graph and various APIs in real time. So for those of us that work in these environments every day, I think it changes quite meaningfully how portion of your administrative work could be approached, right? Instead of having to go into a tool and a dashboard and a whatever to do your daily checks or whatever it is, you can now just ask a question. I think that's pretty cool, right? So really, really helpful. And then I'll scoot on to the second one. So the second tool is the Microsoft Graph Skill. Again, a separate tool. And this addresses a specific and, well, I guess you could say a fairly well-defined problem, which is the large language models are trained on data that, as I touched on, right, months or sometimes more than a year old. The Microsoft Graph API, get ready for this, has over 27,000 endpoints and is updated every week. So whenever you just point an AI at the Graph API, without that current knowledge, it's going to error, it's going to use paths that don't exist anymore, going to miss perhaps permissions or getting the syntax wrong, right? So the Graph Skill solves this by bundling the entire Microsoft Graph API structure as local indexes. I mean, super job. And how on earth he's managed to do this, I don't know. But anyway, so, he's essentially got, over 27,000 endpoints, there's more than 6,000 endpoint documentation entries, something like 4,000 plus resource schemas, and being open sourced, a vast community of people that are sort of building verified queries. So, you can use stuff that's known to work and has been continually, iterated by the community. So, and you can see the linkage, right? The two tools are designed to work together. The Graph Skill provides the accurate, up-to-date knowledge of what the API can do, how to call it, and then Locker handles the actual execution against your tenant. So that combination means, if you were to build, or your AI assistant has all the current knowledge, everything it needs to act on it directly in, as Meryl would be the first to say, in a safe, secure by default, safe manner. So everything you do is read-only unless you explicitly permit it, and the delete action is permanently blocked. Nobody can do anything. So it's a read-only capability. So super, super interesting. So if you are thinking of building anything in this space, I know the guys here have dabbled with it, then go have a gander. I'm going to pause there and have a slurp of coffee. Is there anything you want to say to that?
Let me take myself off of mute.
Yeah.
Because there was a little bit of background noise there. I need to go and have a look at this, which is a phrase I think I say quite a few times on the pod. Because one of the biggest issues I've had with working with GitHub Copilot in particular, and that is when I tell it to go and look at an endpoint. Now, that could be Graph, it could be a table somewhere in Sentinel or in Lake or wherever it might well be, and it will just make up a API or a schema or something, because it doesn't go and do that discovery piece first, whatever you want to call it, to say, okay, right, this is what's in the table, these are the column names, this is the data types, therefore I'm going to construct my query like this. It'll just go, I'm just going to guess. So anything that helps the agents avoid that guesswork when it's trying to do things is a plus. And I really wish that somebody within GitHub or within Claude or whatever will actually go around and get rid of that guesswork from within the model. I mean, it's happened to me today that I was telling it to investigate a bug, and it literally said in the text, I'm going to stop guessing now. I don't want. Well, why were you guessing in the first place? Look at what's going on. Just don't go, oh yes, I'm going to magically sort of invent something from thin air and go and try and fix that when you've got no evidence for that. So yeah, anything that helps in that space, I think, is worthwhile.
And just to add, Meryl Fernando is doing so much, and recently they've even launched hardening Entra. It's more like drawing, like cartoony, and they explain like concepts that are very deep and to understand, but in a one pager. I had no idea about all his work about graph, and this is overwhelming because usually you follow one person that give you information. But now there's so much things he does, this guy. I didn't know it was that scale. So really impressive. I'm going to have to check. As usual with David, I have to check now. I have to spend some time to play with this MCP.
Superb. Good. All right. Thank you, guys. I will move on. So I think it was earlier this month. I think it was the 2nd of April. Might have been a bit earlier. I can't remember now. Microsoft have released something interesting, which is called the Agent Governance Toolkit. And it's on its open source blog. Now, this GitHub repository is who created it, a chap called Imran Siddiq. He's a principal group engineering manager at Microsoft. And I guess you could say the framing, having gone through it behind this project, starts with a question, as many seem to be nowadays, but a question that's harder to answer than it actually first appears. As agents are given more autonomy, that's a really intentional word, who actually governs what they do, not what, right? So who governs it? And as we've just spoken, right, they're not confined anymore to answering questions in the chat window. They can book flights, they can execute code, they can burn tokens. That's a vast rate of knots, as Richard and I were talking about the other day, where GitHub are realizing how much long-running tasks are actually costing. And these are all things that where they take action could potentially have sort of real-world consequences, sure. And you've seen the evolution of some of the existing frameworks, whether it's AutoGen as that's grown into the agent framework, through AI and other stuff, right? And it's made it it's made it straightforward to build agents that reason, plan, and act. What hasn't kept pace is the whole infrastructure governing it. And I know we've got Agent 365, we've got a bunch of stuff, but that's not necessarily the answer. And I'd missed this actually. December last year, OWASP published the top 10 for agentic applications, which is the first sort of formal taxonomy of risks specific to autonomous AI agents. And some useful things there that you may intellectually already know, but it's always nice to see these things written down, right? So things like goal hijacking, tool misuse, identity misuse, memory poisoning, which is a fun one at the moment, things like cascading failures, rogue agent behavior, a bunch of others. And I think the important thing here is that these aren't actually hypothetical edge cases, which some of this stuff can be in OWASP. They're actually failure modes that people are seeing in practice at the moment. And then you layer into that the whole EU AI Act, and the obligation. Oh, it's an obligation now, isn't it, to take effect this August, I think. And there's a US one. I think there's a Colorado AI Act. Am I remembering that right? That I think also.
I'll have to go and have a look at that one. The EU one is obviously top of mind for myself and obviously you, which is interesting. But I don't know about a US specific one yet.
Yeah, I'll have to double check that. I can't remember. So the purpose of the Agent Governance Toolkit is a response to this gap, right? It consists of 7 independently installable packages: Python, TypeScript, Rust, Go, whatever, .NET. And it has this, for some reason I've written down Agent OS, but Agent OS is ultimately a stateless engine that intercepts every agent action before it executes under 0.1 milliseconds, I think, at the 99th percentile. That's a mouthful to get out, isn't it? And it supports things like YAML rules or OPA, Rego, CEDA policy languages. So lots of sorts of breadth there in terms of what it supports. And it also supports the agent mesh piece supports or provides cryptographic identity using sort of decentralized identifiers. So it enables then you to overcome this challenge of sort of agent to agent communication. It secures that. What else? Supports. What else does this do? Oh, it gives you trust scoring on a 0 to 1,000 scale across 5 behavioral tiers. The trust is then treated kind of as a dynamic thing rather than binary, which is super important, and then sort of decays as you would expect based on observed behavior. Got a thing called the agent runtime provides execution rings, depending on the CPU privilege levels. Bug orchestration, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff there. Agent SRE sort of gives you SRE practices to agent systems, service level objectives, error budgets, all that stuff. You've got another piece which is agent compliance, which provides sort of the automated governance verification. This is where you would map in the stuff to do with the EU AI Act or SOC 2 or whatever it is. Plus, obviously, the OWASP top 10 that we just spoke about. And then there's a agent marketplace element, which handles sort of plugins and supply chain signing. So there's, I'm not going to keep going because there's loads and loads to talk about. But I think it's really worth a look because, the intent here is to move it as a project into sort of a real home. So whether it's OWASP or LFAI or LFAI and data, I should say. So the governance of the toolkit sits again with the community rather than sort of Microsoft as an organization, which is super interesting, and I think gives a good indicator the import that Microsoft are applying to this, right? If they're willing to do all that work and then outsource it. A lot of these things tend to be a bit smaller and then it grows, right? So yeah, well worth having a look at it if you're going to be doing production agents in your environment. Yep, pause, have another quick slurp of coffee, and then feel free to chip in if you need anything.
Well, I think that leads in quite nicely to the segment that I was going to kick off with as well. So
go for it.
We might come back to you on to wrap that one up, David. But I think just
go for it.
Picking up on what you just said with the Agent Governance Toolkit, I think it's an important thing to flag, because what struck me about this is that it's addressing governance at the runtime end, which is probably the hardest part to target. So you've got all these autonomous agents making decisions and acting on them, but you need those controls in place before the thing goes and does something you didn't really want it to do. So I think that's, it's interesting that they're approaching it from that side. And I think you're right. Microsoft had to look at doing this purely because, and I think this is well known at the moment, they're going through, is that they are having some issues with deploying or getting organizations to adopt Copilot. So I think they've only got about 15 million paid Copilot seats at the last earnings call. And I think the next one is next Tuesday, as I mentioned in the intro. So I'll be really interested to see if that number's gone up or whether they might gloss over it. Because in effect, that's only about 3% of their M365 base.
Yeah.
And obviously, when you tie that in with the capex that they're having, to spend out, it's primarily because of the data center builds, etc., which is something like 37.5 billion. In the single quarter last time, which is up 66% year on year, roughly. So that makes that adoption piece really, 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 really critical. And one of the things that I think we both, and Cyrus is well aware of, is I think one of the reasons why this is landing so slowly is almost always about governance. Or more specifically, it's a permissions problem, probably dressed up as a governance problem, or at least a mixture of both. because Copilot in its essence, and I'm not talking about custom agents here or orchestration agents, whatever you might want to call them. But if you take Copilot as a standalone thing, it's basically a magnifying glass of whatever is in your estate already. And if your estate permissions, and we've talked about this before, I mean, if you've got SharePoint that's just open to the world, which is what SharePoint was obviously was primarily designed to be anyway, then you've just got an open door to anything that is going to be looking at that, and regardless of what purview you sort of stick on the top of it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. The bottom line is I think that the toolkit is really important, and I've been spending a lot of time over the last month or so actually looking at how you do this, and not just from a Microsoft space as well. It's important because one of the benefits of working at IBM is that we don't have to focus just on Microsoft technology. We have to almost look at, okay, what is AWS doing? What's GCP doing? What's Anthropic doing? And it's actually a very hard problem to tackle, especially when you're looking at potentially the sort of discovery of shadow AI. And again, shadow AI, I'm using that loosely here because it's not necessarily just somebody spinning up something on their own. It's actually perhaps more organized, but they've not followed the sort of set procedures set down by the CIO office, which is, fairly, frequently done in my experience. So I think we'll just have to see how that plays out. And we've talked about this, I think, a number of times, but governance is going to be incredibly important, regardless of what flavor that takes and where you come from, whether it's bottom down or whether it's, bottom up or top down. I think that's going to be really, really important.
Yeah, no, I agree completely.
Which doesn't lead me onto my second topic. So almost a complete about turn for this one is that I've been working on a project for the last 2 or 3 weeks. And it's in that stage at the moment where we're actually just sort of brainstorming things, I suppose. And trying to figure out what a solution might look like or what it could do or what integration points it might have or how we're going to use agents, etc. So I'm not going to go into too much details around what it is that I'm doing because I've got my sort of nagging thing on my shoulder saying you probably shouldn't be talking about it too much. But basically, I was sent a PowerPoint presentation from some UX guys from Microsoft. It doesn't really matter, from Microsoft. And I was scanning through the deck and I was going, I really wish I could do wireframes like they've done in this in this presentation because they're really, 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 really good. And it gave you a very good idea of what it was that they were thinking, especially when you add some of the context around that. So I thought, well, I can't really do that same level of graphics. I don't have that capability. I can copy things quite well, but I can't really take what's in my head and put that down on paper in the way that they did. And typically, I might well have gone down that PowerPoint route or even Visio, but it would have been very simplistic and wouldn't necessarily have conveyed what I wanted to do. So you might get something at the end of the day, but it wasn't quite what I would have hoped for it to be. So what I did this week is, as everybody knows, frequent listeners, you, David, Cyrus, etc., I've been sort of going overboard on the whole vibe coding thing recently. So I thought, well, hang on a second. Why don't I vibe code a wireframe / prototype / demo, whatever you want to call it? And basically that's what I did. So I spent the last couple of weeks, possibly a week or so, on and off, because it's not obviously a full-time job, working with a really weird sort of triumvirate of tools. So Claude to sort of work things out and to brainstorm ideas, into GitHub Copilot, and then into a sort of workshop type scenario where we're sort of having collaborations about things. And what was really interesting is I managed to come up with something. I'm not going to say that it was graphically amazing or anything else like that, but it did give me the ability to actually visualize something and share that visualization with a group of people to a much higher fidelity than I could have done with doing it just in PowerPoint or Visio. Or can anybody remember what the Microsoft tool is? Then Microsoft actually had like a design tool a little while ago that enabled you to do it. But for the life of me, I can't remember what it was called.
I had a deja vu of this conversation. If David, you find it last time, I think.
I can't remember.
Was it with someone else? I'll find it.
Escapes me.
I really wish I could remember what that tool was, because I did have it, and you were able to like draw wireframes and then say, okay, like this button, you click on this button and it goes to this screen. But for the life of me, I can't remember what that tool was called. But in effect, what I've done is actually built that. There's no real code behind it, apart from the fact that you've got some code that goes from screen to screen and perhaps does a pop-up or some other sort of user interface, activity. But I've been able to do that relatively quickly, with a good level of, I'm not sure fidelity is the right word, but a good level of sort of look and feel that I can pass it to people and say, look, this is what is going on in my brain. Give me some feedback. And I found that worked really, really, really well. And it's slightly ironic, I think. Thank you, Alanis, for probably the misuse of that word. But I don't know who else noticed this, because I don't think it was that widely shouted about, but I might have just missed it. But Anthropic shipped Claude design this week, or possibly last week, which I've got access to through the paid pro license that I'm paying for out of my own pocket. Thank you, everybody from IBM. And in there is actually a prototyping tool, which I saw afterwards. Actually, after I'd done all this work, I saw that there was actually like a screen design / prototyping element in there. So it's very serendipitous, and it's really interesting to me, at least, that I've sort of went through that process of doing this, and then suddenly there's a tool here that basically validates, saying, yes, there was a gap in this area.
Yeah.
Well, at least we perceive there's a gap here. We think we might have filled it. Now, I haven't gone down and used it yet, because it did look fairly simplistic for what I wanted to do. There you go. I've now gone from doing vibe coding, where I'm actually developing applications, to the actual first part of that process, where you're doing the sort of design and sort of MVP type prototyping stage. So
interesting.
There you
That's
go.
Really interesting. And I noticed, I only noticed today, actually, there's a new blueprint image generation mode in ChatGPT, so public ChatGPT. So they're obviously heading down some extent that route as well. So yeah, it'll be super interesting to see where that goes.
Yeah, and I've now taken that idea, and I've so the Atom tool that was demoed at RSA, that's actually I keep getting asked for demos for that internally. But not for me giving the demo. Basically, somebody else going and giving the demo, and I was like, "Well, good grief, this is not necessarily that easy to do."
Yeah.
So I basically took the same mechanism that I was using for this prototyping, and I've created like a little agent that sits on top of a website that I've built, and then does the whole demo thing. So it'll go, oh, if you click here, and it'll move click on it, put a little message box up.
Very cool.
And that came out of the prototyping work that I was doing for this other project. And I've now done that on 2 different applications. So there you go. Reuse. We always like a bit of reuse.
Very good.
And
do I carry on, or shall we go to Cyrus for a bit of news? I've
got one more bit, but if you want to carry on, David, because mine will lead nicely, I think, into Cyrus's bit. So I think I might have interrupted your flow on that one. So let's go back.
All good. So, and somewhat helpfully, I guess you could say, the topic sort of takes a completely different angle to the previous 2, and this one there's a bit of guilty personal enjoyment, if I'm honest. So it's a thing called Mem Palace, and was released by Mila Jokovic and I believe her partner as well. And if that name means nothing to you, shame on you. But it should at least mean something culturally. So she's the lady that played Lilu in The Fifth Element, and that is my most favorite film ever. So, and yes, I know it's quite a specific reason to pay attention to what is, in fact, an open source memory project. But I guess hear me out. So there is some technical substance that's worth listening to. So we know that, The Fifth Element, for those who have not seen it, shame on you, is built around the idea that you have sort of 4 classical elements are not enough. So you've got earth, fire, wind, water, necessary but insufficient. And in The Fifth Element, life itself, the thing is the thing that binds the others together and gives them meaning. And found it quite hard to ignore that when I was sort of thinking about what Mem Palace is trying to do by AI. You can have, as we touched on, right, all the reasoning capability in the world, the retrieval, the tool use, we've spoken about that with Meryl's stuff, code generation, Richard, you've spoken about that. But without memory, and I think, Richard, you've touched on this, you've built something yourself, haven't you, that's broadly similar, but without memory, without that continuity of identity across time, something pretty fundamental is still missing. And Mem Palace is, I guess you could say, making a direct argument that memory is the missing piece to keep all these things together. And, I've been working on something in a similar vein myself. So I've got this idea which is called Cortex-U, which draws on Tiago Forte's work in building a second brain. And I'd stalled on that for a while, and seeing Mem Palace along with some stuff from Andrej Karpathy on similar themes meant I went back to it and actually built something. And you can go look at my blog if you want to read about that. And I'm going to talk about that here. And I guess, on the Mem Palace front itself, because I guess you can say the design decisions that are used in making it are what make it interesting. So every conversation right now, typically, unless you're every new conversation, I should say, right, typically starts from nothing, and you have manual jiggery pokery to try and get it to understand what's going on. So it doesn't know what you discussed last week, what your projects are. Now, the ChatGPT public version does a pretty decent job of that because they've introduced memory. It's not great, but it works. Copilot has a personalization thing where it tries to remember things, but again, not always the best. So each session is essentially stateless when it starts, and that's a constraint on how useful the tool can be over time, especially when you're working on long-running projects. And, we're all using it on a daily basis, I think, right? And it gets a bit irksome, if I'm honest. I keep finding myself in this loop. And Mem Palace draws on the method of Loki, I think it is, isn't it? LOCI, which is which is an ancient Greek and Roman memory technique in which a person memorizes information by placing it in specific locations within an imagined building. I've tried this, by the way, myself, and I can't do it. For whatever reason, my brain doesn't do it. Because I tried to do it with names. I'm really bad with names, and I tried this and I failed. But anyway, you walk into the building mentally to retrieve what's stored. So you walk into a room and you can go, well, on the left-hand side, I've got things about Fred. And in the room about Fred, you've got a plant pot, and the plant pot has Fred's surname in, or whatever. You get what it is. But essentially, Mem Palace applies this structure literally and then makes it machine readable. So, memory is organized into 4 layers. There's wings, rooms, bits, drawers. And you've got wings, which are the broad categories, or anchored to a real entity, so it could be a project. Wings are rooms that describe the discrete units of time, so usually, I guess you could say per day or per session. and are arranged chronologically. Inside each room, you've got a closet. And inside those, which could be a topic, right? Inside those, you've got drawers, which are a single chunk of verbatim content. So everything, right? The exact words, they're unchanged. They're stored permanently with no summarization and no paraphrasing. And I think that's really important because AI has a habit of sucking out some of the context when you do get it to do that. And then above that verbatim sits an index written in, I don't actually know what it stands for, AAAK. Or it's very clever, but I don't know what it stands for, which is a compressed symbolic dialect designed for fast scanning by a language model. So then this means the model can scan thousands of index entries in a single pass and locate exactly the right drawer without reading all the underlying content. So obviously speed on the index is super important, and then you get this fidelity from the content layer. It's all local, so it uses ChromaDB, does vector storage on disk, uses SQLite to manage the knowledge graph, uploaded, sync to the cloud, no API keys needed, which is quite nice. So everything works offline. And filing and indexing happen automatically through Claude Code. Other things, I'm not seeing it work quite as well, so I need to work out. I couldn't get it to work properly in GitHub Copilot. So, just mindful of time, we're sort of running out, but super easy to install. You do it with a single pip command. There's a bunch of documentation that you can go and read at mempalaceofficial.com, I think, and go look. And it's becoming a bit of a motive subject as well. So there are many people on this bandwagon at the moment with many different capabilities. This obviously resonated with me on a more personal level, which makes me more interested in it. Are there better out there? Who knows? Probably. But, have a look at this, have a look at the others, and then come to your own judgment, I would say.
So I'm going to be as brief as I can be, which is probably not very brief, knowing me. But memory and context is increasingly key. And I remember the last week, we've been sort of arguing about, again, this is going back to a project internally, about how much memory should an agent have within a system. So if you, just for, I'm going to pick an example out of the air, but if you've got a chatbot on a web intake, for example, should that have enough memory to say, actually, you spoke to me 3 months ago and you spoke to me about this, and I don't know, you were stroppy or you were happy or whatever so you have that sort of sentiment sort of coming into it as well, so that bot remembers and can treat you a little bit differently or customizably, if you want, however you want to do it, or personally, as opposed to just I'm going to ask you these questions and I'm going to route you here because that's what I've been told to do. Yeah. And so then you get that question about, well, actually, should it have a memory across multiple conversations, just one conversation, one client, multiple clients, different teams, different departments? That opens up the governance question as well, which is where you sort of come in to say, well, actually, can we do this? And then, but what's then the governance or the compliance risk around it? But yeah, I could probably sit here and talk about that for the whole of the pod. So we better not. Before I pass it across to Cyrus, I just want to do a quick, literally 10-second piece about an email I received reminding me that Sentinel is not end of life as such, but it is being moved into the Defender portal, and they've pushed the date back for that cutover again. So I think it was at some point in 2026. It's now going to be March 27. So anybody that's still thinking about this or having to worry about it, you've got some extra time, because obviously there's a bit of pushback somewhere around that end of life date from Microsoft. Anyway, Sentinel to Cyrus and security. That's the transition.
Lovely. I'll try to be as fast as I can. A lot of things you said, David, helps actually what I wanted to present. For your movies, yes, it was my favorite movie. Luc Besson is a French. I remember from 2022 when there was a French bashing with America and France. The movie was unreleased from the US. So there's a lot of Americans who don't know that movie. So it's really important. We also talk about this one. It's a very good one. Also, if you play the game called Flashback, there is some scene from the game that are kind of inspired the movie. So that's why it's my favorite game when I was a kid anyway. Talking about France quickly, there is a news that I think is really relevant. We talk a lot about, it was not in my subject a lot. It was talking about sovereign cloud. And you saw that the French government now stopped completely with Microsoft. 1.2 million agents from the government will not go to Linux. Massive news. Not sure if it's good or bad, but it's a sign that sovereign cloud will be a subject to discuss even more now throughout Europe. So now quickly on the news for Intune, I'm not going to dive deep. I'm going to try a new format, just like giving the name and explaining it superficially, and I will share all the documentation promised with you, Richard, for sharing. If you're on YouTube, if you're on Spotify, join the YouTube and check the links. There is the big one is Windows Auto Patch update readiness. There is a tenant-wide management status report. And the news was from March. I didn't know because when you learn auto patch, it's kind of deploy and forget. Kind of, it's never like that. But this one is improved. There's a lot of new report, a lot of what will happen to my device, etc. And there's someone on LinkedIn randomly telling me that the comment in the comment section on one of my blog article, I checked. It's true. There's so many change, and it's interesting. The next news is hot patching is now the default, and from the May 26th security update from Windows, it will be enabled at in tenant level, and it's available since April 1st. And I know, David, you talked about auto patch for Azure Arc like months ago. So now this is more for the Intune on everyone's laptop. It's very good. And you basically, you don't need to restart for applying updates. And we know that people complain a lot about that, myself included. It's insane. Even on Mac, it's the same, but it's too much. And to digress quickly on the movie, when I was young, there was a movie called True Lies. I'm sure you know that movie or not. It's with Schwarzenegger in it. I'm not sure in English if it's a different name. Anyway, so in that movie, there's a scene where
True Lies, the Arnold Schwarzenegger one.
Lovely, because I know French they change and they use English. I don't know why they do that sometimes. So there's a scene where I was 6. I was really young when I saw that movie, and today it will be called parent abuse because normally the children should not watch this movie. But it was a different time. I don't judge my parents.
Early education.
I really liked the movie. I didn't understand all the politics, but I really liked to see the actions. And there was a scene I remember. Schwarzenegger put his glasses. He's in the toilet. He put the camera behind him, and the camera feed directly go to his glasses, and you can see the terrorist behind him, and basically he defend himself. That was really early for its time, and we know that there's something called Android XR, and I know it's a bit the same. It's glasses, it's AI mixed, and it's going to be again another attempt of popularizing AR glass. Surprisingly, 2 weeks ago I saw news and I thought it was just a phone, but actually no, it's Android XR is like the ecosystem for this kind of new glasses. When Android do something, usually it's spread. So now it's included in Intune, which is interesting because Intune normally is more corporate, or we talk about factories and stuff. Anything that will come as a device will be injected to Intune. That's what I get. I will not talk about, because we have not enough time, about the IBV. I will quickly go to the news on maybe Entra. Quickly. We like to say here that Entra is not just signing and it's not MFA only, it's more than that. One of the new evidence of that is there's a recent update in its tenant configuration management API, and basically you can take a snapshot of your whole tenant configuration in JSON format and replicate it elsewhere, or even check every small drift. I know we talked about some flavor of that, but this is now working as completely as code, and you can duplicate any tenants at scale. I will just pass this news. Next one is condition access optimization agent. So now you have this agent is not just showing any small drift you have in your tenant, is giving you more advice on details like slow drift, small exceptions, etc. and it helps in the new governance mindset, which is not like you produce a report and you see it in the next year, next 6 months. It's live, and you can constantly see what's happening in your tenant. I'm filtering as I speak. Yes, for Sentinel and Defender there was 2, but I will talk about only one. It's called Entity Analyzer. It became generally available on April 1st. And what does it does? It checks URLs, identity, combine all the threat intelligence, prevalence, with context. It takes all the signal and putting in one place. And it works also with the newly released from 2 days ago, 20th of April, the new Sentinel MCP graph tool to give even more context and rich signals. And it's all in one. So that's why the news you said, Richard, for next year, the Defender becoming one platform. There's a huge push for that, but yes, also pushback. So interesting to know. I didn't know there was a pushback again, to be fair. It's a good news because a corporation need to change the process. On the last one, I'm going to go fast. On Purview, this one, ring-fenced, operations with administrative unit. So for large organization, you need to have central standard view, but you need to give usually how it works, you need to give local privilege and local control governance for small units, sales, whatever, a country or even departments. So that's possible now. It was not possible before. And so you have administrative units, the same as we have in Intune, Entra, etc. Now within Purview, with this mindset of ring fenced. So I'll share the news and be easy to read. It's free. Do you have 1 minute or should we stop here now? Good. Okay. David, you were mentioning something about, not something, the open source documentation with agent security and the OWASP for AI agents. And I read that this morning when you shared the link. I really like that one. I just wanted to talk about. It's the link to the IBV, the documentation. It's almost a one-liner. You talked about AI poisoning. That's not a theory anymore. That's absolutely. I just read the numbers. I'm going to just read. So it's IBV Institute for Business Value from IBM. It's all the thought leadership, all the research done with C-suite leaders. This one was paid by Palo Alto, but led by Microsoft, by IBM, and it's based on 1,000 C-suite leaders. 61% said that the organization's AI model assets or data had already been compromised. And 67% said that they had been targeted by an AI-enabled attack in the last year. So when you check the OWASP shift to AI on all these top 10 stuff, it's not just like someone doing theory in a room and they're all happy with like a slides and also it's a leadership thing. No, it's actually with 61%, like the data poisoning, agent abuse, and it's happening as we speak. So please have a look at the documentation that David mentioned. That's very good. It's the link inside for the OWASP. That's very important. And and if you want to follow someone, Gerald Parham is from IBM. Is the one who mentioned that compressed version of that research from Palo Alto and IBM. That's it for me.
Super interesting.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Cyrus. You covered an awful lot in a very short time. So thank you for sort of making up for my long-windedness during the course of this recording. I think, though, that basically, unless there was something from anybody else on the call, I think that is where we can wrap. Again, thank you for everybody who listens or watches, depending on the platform, whether Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube, etc. Please do drop us a comment or a like or something like that to let us know how we're doing. And I will wish everybody a good rest of the day, and we will speak to you in 2 weeks' time.